If you have your Bibles with you this morning, turn with me in the 7th chapter of the book of Daniel. Now, we're still on the subject, a troubled world. And the two services that I did it specifically to let you know from the material that I was gathering this from, just how carnal man in an hour as this thinks, how his mind runs. And if you remember, brothers and sisters, I referred to many things these economists are predicting. In fact, the one source, they putting from the 1995 to the 2005 as some of the greatest things, as the way they look at it, is going to transpire in this country. There was a lot of things I didn't even touch on. In fact, as this one source figured and calculates, that due to the fact we've got such a troubled society in America, that many of the rich and the elite type people are leaving the big congested metropolitan cities, and they're moving to the outer fringes, into areas where a lot of the smaller industries are going, as things develop into a complete transformation and a change. They even brought out, due to the fact that our social services in the next few years are going to break down, meaning government, due to the shortage of revenue, that public schools will become so deteriorated, so out of control, gangs ruling, that as people move away from these congested places into these new areas, and as they begin to build their future the way they picture it, even they will change the school system as it is in their areas. They'll take it completely away from the public school of government, and it will be schools run by private enterprise. The people themselves will establish it. They will maintain their own police department, their own fire department, their own school, and talk about the way they look at it. The textbook will become an obsolete thing because everything will be computerized. Well, I have to say, if time lasts long enough, that's probably what will happen. Because conditions force people to do things otherwise they wouldn't do. But now the reason I brought them two sermons is this. Do we have that much time? Is there really that much time left? I grant you, some of those things will be in the making, because it's the natural way man thinks. Natural man does not stand still without looking at conditions and at least anticipating or figuring, what can I do for myself? What can I do to help change conditions that affect me? He will do it if he has the time. But the big question is, do we have the time? And I have to say this morning, we do not have the time. But that don't change carnal men, politicians, economists from thinking like they do. And even preachers from preaching like they do. It's a sad thing. I got enough stuff there, brothers and sisters. I want to refer to some of the stuff in this sense. If we had another 50 or 60 years of time, I would say, yes, in all probability, we would live to see a day much like it. Some of these New World Order advocators, politicians, that's all they can see. They see in this New World Order a complete takeover and the destruction of the Constitution of America. We will be living as a nation, like a state, under a world government wherein our Constitution don't mean a dime. Already I have literature at home. I just brought a little taste of it, because I figured somebody sitting here has read a little bit, and they figure, well, that Jackson can't have everything. I got some stuff at home would make your blood boil as an American. Already they're saying in this nation, they're getting ready to bring the United States into this New World Order era. That we have already 4 crematoriums built, and some at Indianapolis, Indiana. In Texas, they have a guillotine. And how many knows what that is? It's a place where they behead people. At Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, there's already supposed to be Russian tanks seen on flat cars in Montana in a railroad. Russian tanks and equipment supposed to have been seen on railroad cars. Now, brothers and sisters, I happen to know we fought a war about 2.5 years ago in the Gulf. And most of that stuff these people see is captured stuff from the Iraqis, which every last bit of it was Russian-made. And I happen to know, brothers and sisters, that the military forces use such stuff as target practice. Now, I don't care how much material you got. I just have to refer to this. About the time the Gulf War was starting, this book was given to me. It's The New World Order by Pat Robertson. I believe a little bit of it will prevail up to a certain point, and then it'll just fall through it. I got another one entitled Global Occupation. I treat it just about the same way. Because these men are blind. They don't see the Bible. I did not know I had it. There's another book given to me. The title of it is World of Our Fathers. That's the history of the Jews as they immigrated to the New World. I'll be reading in this message, I don't know what it'll be this morning, tonight, or when, but taken from diaries of people who experienced the hardships to be separated from relatives in the old world as they came to the new world. And here is the computer population of the Jews in the world today. All this other stuff is different writings I get. I just brought a little bit of it along. I get this stuff all the time. Just to let you know, brothers and sisters, if I didn't believe the Bible, I'd have to believe some of that. There is no way, brothers and sisters, you can fit all of that stuff in here. You don't even have time. First off, brothers and sisters, Matthew 24 gives us a precise interval. You might say it's a yardstick. Jesus said, when you see all these things coming to pass, and then he used the fig tree really as a focal point of measurement. Said, all these things shall not have passed away. Or this generation that sees these things will not have passed away until all these things will be fulfilled. I grant you, the world today is very much in a mess. It's got to be that way in order to bring about the last days. None of the world leaders, as they're in office now, keep in mind, not a one of them is reading the Bible. They're not trying to go by the Bible. They're trying to resolve the world's problem by their own carnal, political, economical outlook. What can we do? If there's time, then a lot of that will come about. But if there's not, most of it's going to fall through, because it's only the ideas of people and politicians. If in the 17th chapter of Revelation it tells about the 10 horns, and there they are represented. They are the 10 major nations of Western Europe. It plainly tells you there, as the beast is seen coming up for the last days, and that's your and my day. It says, these 10 horns have received no kingdom as yet. What does that mean? If you have ever studied history, when the Roman Empire and its territory began to break up and later became identified into all of this, only the Lord knows the wars those horns fought with one another. Each one seeking to take a control of Europe as his own. There was one terrible time called the 100 Years' War. How many thousands of men in Europe do you think was lost in a war ravaged by power-crazed dictators, lords of big land holdings? But man passed through that. When the Reformation did hit, we begin with Martin Luther, 1520. Europe had struggled and struggled through centuries of wars one with another, trying to take a slice of Europe. After that, the world entered into a new era, because the new world had been discovered. This represents it, brothers and sisters. Not only had the new world been discovered, but a route had also been found going around the world this way, going around the tip of South America, across the Pacific to the Orient. We find, brothers and sisters, here went the British, here went the Dutch, here went the French. How do you think the colonial powers in Europe got there? They did it all after the New World was discovered. And for over 200 years, these European powers controlled vast regions in the Oriental Asiatic world. When I was going to school, they said the sun never sets on a British flag. The only place it stands today is in the Great Britain Islands. From the Mediterranean to India, to the Orient, Great Britain's flag flew. Yes, Germany went to Africa. The Dutch went to the Dutch East Indies. French went to the Orient. All of that, brothers and sisters, they was looking for a conquest. All of that tells me historically, not one of them horns could ever control the territorial area of old Roman Empire. But it says in Revelation 17, but they received power 1 hour with the beast. Until that hour of time came, there was no way you could get them kings, which is represented in these crowns, to agree to anything biblically. They all had their own ideas. You could have talked to them about the European common market then, and they would have laughed at you, because it was not in their mind. But when World War II hit, and the devastation of that war had left Europe stained with blood from Russia to North Africa, the leaders, when they come out of this terrible onslaught, you got men that think different, Because time brings the change. And that's exactly what you've got to see in the world now and in the few short years that remain. There's going to be some drastic changes taking place that's going to shock politicians, peoples, and societies. It's not what they want they're going to get. It's what they're going to have to expect, because God's going to do it just exactly His way. There ain't no way you can change it. So a lot of this stuff that men have written is just like, I think it was Charles Price. He wrote a book that was supposed to have been released to the public as World War II was in the making and was just coming to close. The title of his book was Proof That Mussolini is the Antichrist. And about the time the printers was getting this book done, he was in a meeting. And all of a sudden in the news, Mussolini has been taken by his own people and his mistress and hung upside down on light poles over there. And when that come out in the world's news, the man had to take his books and say, a man can be wrong. And look at the men who have preached Khrushchev, Stalin, and all of this other stuff, until right on down, brothers and sisters, and then we get the Russian Empire just falls in and caves all to pieces. It all lets you know, brothers and sisters, no, you don't stop politicians. They're going to carry out some of their ideas. And when I think of our own leaders, brothers and sisters, I don't care what part are they from. They'll get their best Sunday go to meeting clothes on, comb their hair, get in their limousine and trot off to a Catholic church or a Baptist church or Presbyterian or Episcopal and sit in there with their bodyguards, self-secured, care less which way the sun comes up or goes down. And brothers and sisters, they use their position to foster their own ideas. But when the time comes for something drastic to change, God just uses some little simple tactic, and along comes something other down the road, just runs into that and rips it all to pieces. Now I say all of that this morning, brothers and sisters. I want you to take a good look at this. You'll find this long about the 3rd chapter of Daniel, I believe. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He called in his astrologers and soothsayers, give them all an opportunity. And when they couldn't interpret, he threatened to put them all to death. But when Daniel heard about it, he sent word to the officer of the guard. Said, just tell the king to stay that order for a little while. God give Daniel, no doubt, the same dream. And when Daniel asked the captain of the guard to take him into the presence of the king, what did he describe? He saw an image. He could have said, I saw a statue. But what it was the statue of a man. Because you see it all described. He told Nebuchadnezzar, thou art this head of gold. Meaning the empire that was under Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Then here comes the Persians. This is the silver. That was confederate of 2 nations, the Medes and the Persians. Then here come the next metal, brass. This is the Grecian Empire. Here comes the 4th empire. This is the Roman Empire. How it stood on 2 legs, Rome and Constantinople. Now, in actuality, brothers and sisters, in this statue, or we will say a memorial up to something, you actually are looking at an hourglass. How many knows what an hourglass is? It's something that has sand in it. Actually, that's what Nebuchadnezzar saw. He saw a giant hourglass. And since it had its beginning with him, we can say this. Every bit of this is related to how God's going to deal with the Jew. Every bit of it. Once this thing started, the Jews lost their ruleship over the Holy Land. Because King Zedekiah was the last king they had, and he was a renegade. They never had another one after that. Jerusalem itself became a city overrun by lords in all of these empires. As time moves on down into this fifth part, it's the same kingdom. It's the same empire, described in two eras of time. This is the time when Rome ruled as the great imperial system, coming on down as she goes into the Catholic era. But as she comes into the feet, where the toes speak out, these same 10 horns that's there are represented right in this. It's when time has, all the sands of time have came into this. Now let any other professor, politician, change the hourglass of God's prophecy. You can't. You cannot take that and make it run any longer to engulf the whole planet Earth. The Roman Empire didn't. If you've got history to show that the Roman Empire ruled China, bring it to me and let me see it. It didn't even end it. The Grecian Empire goes to the borders of India. But from there through Burma, all that vast regions going back, none of these world empires ever touched them, that is to rule them. It was England, brothers and sisters, and France, and these horns in 1700 that began to penetrate the Orient and bring certain sections under colonial era. But it was not to be identified in this. All right. My point is this. You cannot take the hourglass and redesign it and make it fit a new world order. It won't do it. First off, it don't even belong in the Western Hemisphere. Because when Nebuchadnezzar saw this, the New World wasn't even discovered. When Daniel lived in 96 AD, and he saw this coming up in Revelation 13, the New World hadn't been discovered. But as he saw the Roman Empire coming up for the last days, and that's your day and my day, the Roman Empire, which has done pass through this era of time right here, it's down in here, and this is it coming up in the last days after World War II era. That's when the spirit of the thing began to be healed, and John sees it coming up out of the same sea that Daniel saw these four things come up. All right. When he saw this lamb beast coming up out of the earth, you've got to look at two words. One is sea, the other is earth. These words are clues as to how you identify the geographical area from which these things appear. Now, with that, brothers and sisters, I want to take you then to the 7th chapter of Daniel. We're going to read about these beasts, just to get the picture in the back of our mind. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven. These four winds, north, east, south, and west, they're symbolic of the very things that affect man living on earth. Politics, religion, economics, and military. When these winds of conflict begin to move, it affects leaders, politicians. It affects different people within different societies. This is what creates disturbance, international problems. Eventually, out of all of these type of conflicts, there comes forth some kind of a major development. And as he saw the winds blow, the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea. Now, if I had a map of the world here, I could show you why that sea is the Mediterranean. But fix in your mind the Mediterranean Sea. You all know where it's at. But keep in mind, Western Europe, the Atlantic Ocean. You move from Western Europe, you move back to Central Europe. That's the areas of Greece, Romania, Macedonia, and those regions, going up to southern Russia. Then when you move beyond that, brothers and sisters, you come to Turkey, you come to Iran, Persia, those places, you're in Asia now. Then you make a swing, brothers and sisters, and you come down into Saudi Arabia. Then as you swing on around, you come across the land of Israel, the place of Jordan, the Bible land. You swing across to North Africa. That's the old world of prophecy. That's the whole earth that's mentioned in many times in prophecy. When we read the whole earth, immediately your mind wants to go, the whole planet. It's not the whole planet at all. It's that part of the prophecy, brothers and sisters, that's related. The point of it is, in the center of this perimeter is the Great Sea. There are other seas. There's the Sea of Galilee. There's the Dead Sea. There's the Black Sea. But for some reason, this Mediterranean was a sea of commerce and trade, communication. If they came from the north, they had to contend with this thing. So we can say, in this area of the world is where time began, that conditions of the world among the people, God will let certain things transpire that's going to be connected with how he uses world powers to deal with his people Israel. Therefore, brothers and sisters, you've got to keep certain things represented in that hourglass. While in there, brothers and sisters, you have these different types of metal. Those are characteristics of the people and the political leadership of those empires when time passed through that area. But the main thing is this. When we get out here in the days of these 10 toes, it plainly tells us in Daniel, would the God of heaven set up a kingdom? Because that's the rock hewn out of the mountains without hands that came down and run into that and broke it and tore it all to pieces. Means time run out. You've got to look at it in that way. Time runs out. God ain't going to put a third leg on that thing to fit New World Order and all this other junk. Time runs out here. It's when God's dealing with the Jew and these 10 toes. Now, as I say that, brothers and sisters, every bit of this is represented here in this Roman beast coming up for the last days. Look, it's got a mouth like a lion. That's the Babylonian. What does that mean? Sooner or later, brothers and sisters, this revived Roman Empire, as it reaches its last day fulfillment, ready to go towards the week of Daniel, all the territories of the Middle East, that at one time was an empire in itself, will be all incorporated in this. That means Rome will once again, by the powers invested in it, not only will sign a covenant with the Jewish nation, but it will include all the old Middle East nations. That will bring them collectively in. That helps to form the complete body of this thing. That's why it plainly tells you in Daniel, brothers and sisters, in the latter verses. As the angel interpreted this to Daniel, he says, as far as the other beast, when we're talking about this, he says they have their lives and their dominion taken away. But no, their dominion and authority taken away, but their lives are prolonged for a season and a time. All of that means the people will never be destroyed, but their right to be an empire within themselves will disappear. And therefore, the spirit of those people will again be incorporated back in to old Rome, where Rome still sits as the head. And it actually shows, brothers and sisters, you cannot put 5 beasts on this earth. It's got to carry the same characteristics, because time here has got to represent everything that's incorporated into this. And in the days of the old Roman Empire, when she was in her imperial strength coming into the Catholic era, she did not rule the Orient, and neither did she rule the New World. You know that. Now, as we look at this causes us, brothers and sisters, to take a look at the time we're in. I'm going to go ahead and read these beasts. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld it till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. That is a full description, brothers and sisters, of the Babylonian Empire as it passed through the reign of 3 kings. Now then, we come to the second one. This is the Medo-Persians. Behold, another beast, the second like to a bear. And it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth. And these 3 ribs are symbolic of 3 precise kings. And keep in mind, the Medo-Persian Empire had many other kings, but these 3 were the ones that lifted it to its greatest. After that, the empire began to wane away. All right. And they said unto it, Rise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The 4 wings of a fowl and 4 heads are symbolic what happened to Alexander the Great's kingdom after his death. Then 4 great generals took it over, and the territory he had conquered, it remained under their control for a short period of time. And had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. But after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. This is Rome coming up. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces. When you study secular history, you read how Rome actually began to become the great dominating city power over the vast world. A lot of this was done by forming leagues with little territories, which was afraid of other territories. As they lined themselves with Rome, that just give Rome a chance, you might say, to come in like an old mother chicken and hover them. And so them territories became so aligned with Rome that Rome just gobbles them up. On and on over the period of years, this went like this. What Rome didn't conquer by its armies, it took control by leagues and agreements. This comes right on down through the advent of Christ, brothers and sisters. And it stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. Now notice, Daniel's vision sees this beast coming up and going off in time away from him. And therefore, and it had 10 horns. Says nothing about 7 heads, does it? When we go over then into the other parts of the chapter, and the angel of the Lord began to interpret this, when the angel gets down then to the 4th beast about the 10 horns, the angel tells him, in the midst of these 10 will come up another that will magnify himself above its fellows, meaning its predecessors. Why is it these doctors of divinity, they went to the seminaries, they've got as much history as I have. Why is it they never see that horn that exalted itself as the papal power? Keep in mind, Daniel's vision carries the rise of Rome in its imperial beginning, and then eventually it just goes off into time. As it comes on to the Middle Ages, there arises in the midst of the territorial breakup from the old imperial tie to Rome, here rises this other horn, which is a mystical horn. It's not another nation, but it's another power coming up right out of Rome, which exalts itself above the territorial kings, which are identified in these crowns on them. And that's why, brothers and sisters, just before the Reformation strikes, that power of Rome became so powerful. That's why Daniel sees that he subdued 3 kings. And that takes you through secular history. We published it and printed it, what kings it was: Germany, France, and Italy. And then, brothers and sisters, by the time we come to 1450, there was a man by the name of Johann Gutenberg. He invented the printing press. As one of these books that I've got, who is more or less forecasting the future, the outcome, he says the world fluctuates on a 500-year cycle. He says we're facing the year 2000, and he says we have got an invention in our grasp that's destined to change the world. And he says, I'm not predicting the end of the world, but I am saying it's destined to change the world as it is now and has been into a completely altogether different world as to how it exists and how it functions. Just as the printing press was made in 1450, by the time 1492 came, which is, we will say, 40 years later, the New World has been discovered. In the 40 years of time, you've got to realize, Western Europe don't just have one printing press. 40 years has put a printing press in every major communicating city there is in Europe. So when the news did get back to Europe that a new world has been discovered, can't you see the printing press is going to press? Extra, read all about it. Columbus discovered the new world. And brother, that was all people could talk about for days to come. By the time that began to be you might say, the prime talk, from the Mediterranean Sea to the North Sea to the British Isles, now we come, brothers and sisters, to 15 and 20. Now time, brothers and sisters, and the Reformation broke. When the Reformation broke, here comes Martin Luther, here comes Calvin, here comes Knox. Now the printing presses are really rolling. Not only is there a new world for adventure seekers, pilgrims to go to, but now there's a spiritual revival going on. This brings social conflict. And the printing presses was going day and night, printing all about what Luther was saying and so forth. All right, we've come 500 years later. Now it's not the printing press. Look what they do with the computer. And the hour will be, brothers and sisters, just as I read from those origins the other night. The new high-tech electronic communication of these giant telescopes they're putting out there to get ready for this new world era of international, inter-society communication, when you can go in and you've just built a brand new home, and one wall you designate strictly to be a wall of nothing but the super electronic display of a screen as large as the side of a bedroom. They won't be talking about 41-inch screens. They'll be talking about, brothers and sisters, a whole wall being a TV screen. And the new telephone systems. And all of this type of stuff. Sure, if time lasts, that's what we're heading for. You couldn't stop it. But my point is, do we have that much time? Is God going to allow the world that much time? And I have to say, some of it will be in place, but a lot of it will not be in place because they don't have time. But you can't tell them that. Man has to suffer the consequences as God raises up men in which he puts an idea, and that is to make his word come about. Now then, Daniel's vision saw the Roman Empire from its imperial beginning, going through time, the breakup of old imperial Rome, to be taken over by the rising of this little horn, this papal Rome. And that keeps you right on to 1,000, 12, 13, 14, 1500. Then the Reformation strikes. What does that do? That wounds that head, which none of these men, Pat Robertson and all the rest of them, the Seventh-day Adventist history book, they make these 7 heads on this Roman beast 7 different other nations scattered in and around the Mediterranean. And them 7 heads, brothers and sisters, are not national heads. They are political heads that's represented from the old imperial head of the old emperors of Rome that they established, how the evolutionary process of politics and the breakup evolves from one era to another era. Somewhere in the process of time, there becomes 7 distinct periods of the evolutionary breakup, and it all takes place right in Rome until the last one was the power of the papacy. That's why when you read Revelations 12 about the woman that you read there, the woman of mystery, John looked and he saw this great dragon. Yes, it was a heavenly display. It was an actual reflection of what was going on down here on earth. That was how the devil has embodied himself in a reunited, restored earthly kingdom. That great red dragon had 7 heads and 10 horns on it. And notice it's the only scripture in the Bible that even describes about the 7 heads having 7 crowns. Why doesn't it say something about these 7 heads here in Revelation having 7 crowns? All that goes to show, brothers and sisters, them 7 crowns that's on them 7 heads, it's the same old papal crown that took over the old imperial crown. How many understand that? As the emperors of Rome were worshipped and adored by their citizenry, when they got in that chariot and was carried, and we will say driven through the streets, people threw all kinds of flowers and paraphernalia into the streets as the Roman emperor went through town. They worshiping him as a god. Now here comes the Pope from Rome, carried on a chair, sitting on men's shoulders, elevated up, wearing a papal crown, brothers and sisters. Vicara filia dia. Universal sovereign ruler. That's blasphemy. That's why on those 7 heads, the words were blasphemy written. There's only one sovereign universal ruler, and that's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's not blasphemy to call themselves a king, but when they start calling themselves emperor, then that is blasphemy. Because the word emperor don't mean a king. It means ruler, sovereign, universal. It's the position of a god. It all just lets you know, brothers and sisters, why will God give these Trinitarian doctors of divinity the full picture? When they're wrong in one respect, why should they be right in other respects? All of that lets you know, brothers and sisters, he has ordained this letter to be interpreted only by men who belong to his bride. The rest of this church world can go on into oblivion. And that's why they're going that way. They're feeding on Pat Robinson's New World Order. And like the other book I got, Global Conquest. And look, brothers and sisters, our nation, the United States, is actually the nation At the close of World War II, it was our political leaders that helped to draw up the charter of what is called the United Nations. We drew it up. We are the ones that suggested it. Prior to this, when World War I, you had the Paris Peace Pact, then followed by the League of Nations. We were only a temporary member of it for a short period, but we didn't design either one of them. It was designed by European leaders. But when this one was over, the war itself had thrust our nation into the ranks of world leadership. So we took the initiative. So let's bring all the nations of the earth into a body just like our states are. That was basically what it was set up like. And they thought this is going to be the one body of people that will end all wars. Brothers and sisters, two of the bloodiest wars we've ever been involved in was in a war because we wanted to be the police force of the United Nations to show the rest of the world how it's done. We got drawn into Korea, brothers and sisters, and the very people that went in there with us in the initial beginning to start this UN police force action, after it began to get too hot, they pulled out and left us there, brothers and sisters, to take one of the worst, I have to say, humiliations that our troops and commanders in the field had ever been faced with. That was when General MacArthur said to Harry Truman, "Give me the atomic weapon. I will not use it on the Chinese society, but I will use it on their military bases in and out close to cut the supply lines." And that Truman says, no. He withdrew him from the command. And brothers and sisters, after fighting the months we fought and men died, we come back to the 38th parallel, right where the whole thing starts. And when you look at Vietnam, that was France's territory, colonial-wise. Why didn't we not take a lesson? These colonial powers have got to come home. We've already come home. We give the Philippines their independence. We pulled out of the Philippines. While we did keep two bases, and it wasn't long, they would say, "Go home, Yank." And look, this one sister that writes from the Philippines, she worked there for the Air Force at Clark's Air Force Base. Here, Filipino leaders were saying, "Go home, Yank, go home, Yank." All right, we did. But not until God had opened up a volcano and covered that Clark Air Force Base, brother and sister, broke the roofs of the hangars in. So we left there, lock, stock, and barrel, pulled the naval base out of there and set it up at Singapore. That only leaves thousands upon thousands of them Filipino workers that was working for the military for the United States in these two bases to lose their jobs, just to please a political bunch of bureaucrats in office in the Philippines. So my point is this, brothers and sisters, if we gave up the Philippines to give them their own independence, why didn't we take a lesson and let France do the same thing? If the Vietnamese wanted the communist rule, then just get out and let them have it. But no, we was going to show them how. We're going to hold off the spread of communism. Brothers and sisters, again, we sent advisors in there just to show the Vietnamese troops how to fight, only to be drawn in. And finally, it was our troops doing the fighting. And brothers and sisters, what an ordeal UN brought us to. Now, I'm saying all of that, brothers and sisters. That UN headquarters is in New York City. We have pumped into that body of world organization 1/3 of the cost to keep the thing a-going. And while we've allowed China to come in and be a member, many of these other third-rate countries, yet from your own tax dollar treasury is taking money to foster that world body, which many times has voted completely against us, sitting right there. Until the Cold War was over and the Russian perimeter was broken up, Russian spies was over here, presumably being Russian personnel working through UN only to be agents, brothers and sisters, using that opportunity to have political immunity. And they work through American people to buy and to get them to smuggle information concerning secrets. Russia was trying all along, brothers and sisters, to get some kind of a bomb that they could just blow us to smithereens. That's why for many years there was a rat race going on. Who could get to the moon the quickest? Now I'm saying all of these, brothers and sisters, that past time has written a route of history that's went on with this nation as has been affected by that body of UN. But I want you to know, there's not one thing about that UN body that even looks like this. It's not even an image to that. Because keep in mind, the image of the beast is the image of the beast that had the wound by a sword and yet did live. This thing, United Nations, just come up 50 years ago, and there's nothing about it that is even tied to any remnants of this whatsoever. How many realize that? You've got to look at it historically like that. All right. As I say that, that brings me to a certain point. Because as we go to the 13th chapter of Revelations, there are certain words I want to describe to you. Now keep in mind, when Daniel had this experience, and we read about it in the 13th chapter of Revelation, time-wise is 96 AD. So physically he lived when time is still related right in here. Constantinople and Rome are two contemporary cities of the Roman Empire. Catholicism hasn't even come into existence. Time is not down in here. Time is relative right in here. So in 96 AD, in the 4th chapter, when John was asked by the voice that spoke from heaven, "Come up hither, and I will show thee things that shall be hereafter." So then in the spirit world, into heaven, he is projected. He's carried into the future tense, and he sees the Roman Empire coming up for the last days. Not for the Middle Ages. That's already in Daniel. It's coming up for the last days. Because here it's done got the 10 heads, they're fixed. It's done, 10 horns are fixed, and the 7 heads, they're fixed. And he sees that one of the heads has already been wounded. So that all puts it in the past. So this goes to show, this has to be how we see the beginning after World War II, the slow process of Rome being gradually politically and socially by new world leaders, how they are beginning to look on Rome and the importance of Rome. All of this didn't come about in a night's time, because when the World War II was over, the leaders of Europe knew, as they looked out over the devastation of their domains and the cost that this horrible war had brought them and the untold loss of human life, it made them think, now that we've got weapons and we're in an era of time that this weaponry of modern warfare is so devastating, we've got to do something to curtail this mad temper. And this caused Western world leaders to begin to slowly agree, to a certain extent, to begin a cooperation process. This is the beginning of what we call the European Common Community. Slowly they began to work out details, how they could enter economically, communicate, work with one another for the betterment of their peoples and Europe as a whole. They strictly had Europe in mind. They did not have the whole world. They was only looking at Europe. What does this United States do? Keep in mind, the United States is represented right here. The war thrust her to world leadership, didn't it? At the time she was pushed to that point, she was the only nation in this world that had the military capability of the atomic weapons and a navy and an air force to deliver vast destruction at any point in the world. The rest of the world knew it. And the rest of the world says, then to the United States we will listen. What begins to happen? We slowly begin to pump the millions and billions of dollars into Europe for mass rebuilding of their cities. I know many of you have heard of the Marshall Aid Plan. And may I say this, just to take this thought out of your mind. When we read here in this 13th chapter about this lamb beast and how he was the one that caused the whole world to worship the first beast that had the wound by the sword and yet it did live. That word world is not a global world. Stop and think, brothers and sisters. Can you show me anywhere in any kind of newspapers? Did China pump any money into Europe for rebuilding? Did Japan even pump any money into Europe for reconstruction? Did any of the Orients pump any money into Europe for reconstruction? No. Where did it come from? Right here. So that's how you've got to see how to, the word, the whole world, to cause the whole world to worship. But keep in mind, the whole world did not worship it. How many understands my expression? It's the whole prophetic world eventually consents to agree, to give their cooperation to this beastly system in Europe, because time will bring it back to that point. Because that's where time was at when prophecy was moving in this fourth world empire. So when it says the whole world, don't you think that means every nation on this planet? You leave the Orients out of it. Brothers and sisters, the reason I say that, we can't even get Japan to open up her trade markets. Well, how do you think you're going to get Japan to contribute anything to this? You've got a long ways to go. Now, let's read this 13th chapter. And I would like to equate this like this. As John was projected into the future tense, I like to think of this. John was projected into the 20th century, and he saw this thing begin to rise out of the sea after World War II has closed. There was a need and a necessity brought about by the world war condition that demanded reconstruction, rebuilding. In so doing, there had to be cooperation. Europe had to be the focal point. And in so doing, it eventually will terminate. Rome becomes the brain center. Now then, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, same body of water that Daniel saw, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. The same thing that Daniel saw going away is what John saw coming to him as it's being restored, having 7 heads and 10 horns. This goes to show, brothers and sisters, it's already passed through from the imperial Rome. It's done got its territorial breakup established. 10 major nations are now identified by having crowns. 7 heads are fixed. And upon his heads the name of blasphemy. That goes to show these are not territorial heads. They're heads that pertains to political evolutionary breakup, all within the old Roman imperial system. And the beast which I saw was likened to a leopard. That goes to show it not only reaches from Rome, it goes right back to Eastern Europe, picks up Greece. And its feet of a bear carries right on into the Medes and Persians, old Iran today. And its mouth is the mouth of a lion. Yes, it incorporates the old Babylon territory. And the dragon, that old devil, gave him his power and his seat and authority right back in Rome when it all is done. That's where she's headed. Not for United Nations building headquarters in New York City, but for Rome. And verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded. Imagine John standing in the 20th century here, seeing this thing coming up out of this. We will say World War II is in the past. Europe's in the Reconstruction era. But political wise, as things begin to come about, he could see this thing rising up out of the sea. It didn't come about in a night, a day of 24 hours. But it shows the slow, gradual process. God is allowing man, politicians, world conditions to develop, to bring this thing into the forefront. Yes. And his deadly wound was healed. United Nations hasn't got nothing on it that is injured. Think of that. His deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Keep in mind, that don't mean the Orients stand with their mouths gapped open. Keep in mind, New World Order wants to engulf everything. From Alaska to the tip of South America, from Europe to the Orient. It'll never be that way. And they worship the dragon, the devil, which gave power unto the beast, that old European system. And they worship the beast, that old European system, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? There's all these people that worship this have got to be people that is eventually tied to it by agreements, such as will be when finally these territories like Greece, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and all of them are tied to it. Then you have that in its final picture. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things. Keep in mind, brothers and sisters, that mouth, and I want to emphasize this, don't you put that mouth in that lamb. Don't do it. That's not the way it works. That mouth, you take it right back to Daniel 7 or 8. That horn that came up, as Daniel saw it going away, he saw in that horn the mouth and the face of a man, didn't he? And he said that mouth spoke great things, insomuch that he sought to change times and laws and seasons. They've done it. That's why this whole Western world keeps time by a Roman calendar time. And the papacy took an old pagan Roman calendar called the Justin calendar, which begins night in the middle of the night. No other calendar of human measurement of time does that. That's why they begin a year in the middle of the winter season. But think, The whole Western world fluctuates around that kind of a calendar. It was originally designed by the old emperors of Rome, but it's the popes of Rome and the cardinals through the ages that followed that constructed a calendar by how the whole Western world has kept time. So that's why this head, brothers and sisters, still got that mouth in it. So don't put that mouth up there in that lamb. You put that mouth right back over where it belongs. That's a papal authority. That's when the Pope speaks. All right. He speaks great things and blasphemies. Same kind of voice that the old popes back in the Dark Ages. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And brothers and sisters, we're living right now, and I'm going to quit to get ready for tonight. I want to emphasize tonight about this lamb beast, how important it has been, and how it fulfills its purpose. What all it has done, what all the devil has used it for, he has used it to cause the whole world to worship the first beast. That means the old prophetic world. That does not mean the global planet at all. There may be leaders here, according to some of this literature I've got. Yes, we've got politicians who designed the UN. And when we went to the Gulf War, our troops went there under UN supervision. But keep in mind, the men who lay out the battle strategy was United States officers. But I have to say, brothers and sisters, somewheres up the road in front of us, there's going to be some drastic changes take place in the structure of this nation as we see time moving on. Because all of this other stuff, there is not that much time left. But I want to bring here to a certain point for tonight. Now, and he opened his mouth in blaspheming against God. That's what he will talk and say when he sits in Jerusalem. To blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations, only that which is relative to this world beast system in Rome and the Middle East. If you people think for 1 minute, brothers and sisters, that China, which is over 1 billion population, will ever submit their authority to the Pope, you better get up and run. That vast area of the Orient, no doubt, with the beast in the old world as we see it, these vast regions of the Orient will no doubt trade. Yes. But don't you ever think that they're going to come knuckling one day to the Pope and pray for me and bless me. You got the wrong history book. You got one been written by one of these new dealers or these new preachers. Because if these other beasts did not ever penetrate that region, there's no way this thing is going to penetrate that region. And I have to say that for a precise reason, brothers and sisters. Too long now, Christian people in this Western world, we've been reading everything that ever Tom, Dick, and Harry published and put it out over the radio. Well, it's food for thought, and that's about all it is. They get your money. It sounds interesting. Well, it's something to think about. Sure it is. But you don't change God's book. If you don't believe me, brothers and sisters, stick around long enough. We'll see which way this thing begins to go one of these days. Because this thing, to me, brothers and sisters, some of this is going to wind up looking right at George Washington's vision. A lot of people don't realize. They think, well, that don't have to be. I got more confidence in his vision than I have in Bill Clinton's. How many heard what I said? Yes, I've got an envelope of stuff at home. 21 men in this nation have suddenly been all because they were men that knew the ins and out of this man, Bill Clinton. And I have to say, him and that woman, there's no doubt, are two figures that was supposed to get in there to help bring this nation down to one of these last days conditions it was supposed to be in. But if you think Bill Clinton, brothers and sisters, is going to be a leader of a new world order, you got another thing a-coming. I have to say, brothers and sisters, he voted in the homosexual. He voted in the lesbian. He voted in all these perverts. That makes America, brothers and sisters, just about as low down as a dog. If that doesn't put the nation of America just about in a condition for God to strike it with some kind of a judgment, then I don't know what America would have to be for God to do that. And when I read George Washington's vision, that third peril was the worst that ever hit. And when he saw these hordes of people marching, some by land and some by sea, when you look at the world the way it is today, brothers and sisters, they're trying already to form all kinds of leagues and cliques to get along together and trade. But there's been enough of people immigrated into this country by illegal means as well as came by the other route to fulfill that mass of people who would rip this country to pieces. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, if it ever starts, it'll make look what's going on in Bosnia look like child's play. How many really wants L.A. to be repeated? I don't. How many wants that to be the picture in every major city throughout America? I don't. But that may be the way he wants it to go. That may be the way he has designed this. Because all of them are already here. A lot of people don't know there's 12 Muslims now in court. They belong to a clique of Muslims of the Iranian terrorist element, pledged to paralyze the Western world because of things in the Middle East. They had plans, brothers and sisters, to blow up every strategic system of communication, transportation, all of these type of things, beginning in the United States. Because we are the one they hate, because we have pumped the millions and billions of dollars into aid of the reconstruction of the nation and statehood of Israel. And they say, we will paralyze it. And look what they do. They strike the World Trade Center. What a building. But as I said the other night, what if they do succeed? And they do it with your subways. Then your communication terminals. With all this modern scientific communication set up the way they've got it now. Do you think all of them characters are over here for nothing? Don't you think them guys are educated? They've got pictures and diagrams to know where every key point is. And guerrilla warfare is one of the most miserablest. Because you don't know who your enemy is. Well, I'll say no more until tonight. But I have to believe, brothers and sisters, certain things are going precisely the way God wants it. It ain't the way politicians think it's going, but it's going exactly the way God wants it. So with this, let's just keep in mind, brothers and sisters, man does not have enough time to materialize and bring into focus everything he writes about. And I'm glad Jesus Christ is coming. If I didn't believe, brothers and sisters, that this is the hope of the world, I'd have to say, there's stuff right there, brothers and sisters. When I read some of that stuff about crematoriums up here in Indianapolis, Indiana, a guillotine set up in Texas, to do what? To get rid of some of the antagonists and troublemakers in America. If it lasted long enough, sure, there's a bunch of crazy people who would do such a thing. But I happen to know one thing. There's a God up above that ain't going to let no politician set anything in force just because that's his idea. He'll get by with so much, and then he'll bring it all to heart. Heavenly Father, I realize this morning, Lord, I am nothing. But, Lord, I thank you. There's a picture in your book, and how, Lord, you have allowed it to be written. And you've hid certain things, Lord. You have actually hid it so deep, underneath of a lot of other things, Lord. It's impossible for the educated man of the world to even perceive it. Lord, we're just a simple people assembled here today. Help us, Father, to see ourselves in your word, and to know how, Lord, to follow you, and to know how to submit ourselves to you. Above all, Lord, that we might not see these evil days coming upon us unaware, but, Lord, that we might take in consideration everything that is transpiring going on, because, Lord, you admonish us to be watchful and to pray, that we might be accounted worthy to escape all these things. So I thank you, Father, today for your word of truth. Bless my brothers and sisters. Lead us in the hour we live now. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. May the Lord bless you today, brothers and sisters. Ye korabishlivian, no koperi kutavai, abai sebe, tokipi kanasekoto, wutimike torevai talioko, yamanyeko tukarabai, basiven, yetekumanai, o one seko poravietu, libadai dalshivian, mankapero kutavai, Utapashivian, Lando, Munkapero, Lipotere Sikamo, Mamamatatai, Uti Anawetoisie, Sui Isiano, Mukashabai, Mashaviato. Verily I speak again, verily I move amongst thee, to lift thine heart up, to refreshen thee, to encourage thee, my little ones, that I, the living God that have watched over thee in days gone by, I have separated thee from many groups. For in many places thou art being taught many things, and thou art tied to the flesh of many people. But as I have moved in thy behalf to separate thee from that of others, I do these things, saith the Lord, because I have a special purpose in thy life and in thy person. For I purpose, saith the Lord, to mold thee and to fashion thee into that glorious image of my very likeness. For as I do these things in these last days, I have purpose to have a people that in which I will shine, and I will reflect my glorious purpose and presence. And thou wilt know in those moments of time, thou art my people, and I am thy God, and thou wilt leave a testimony in the world about thee, and there will be many that will know that thou art my own, saith the Lord.